So Ejnar, it's such a pleasure to have you here in Klosters, Switzerland for ValueX. I deeply appreciate you coming all the way out from Western United States to be here. And as I was explaining to you just before, the idea is that I get to ask you all sorts of questions and talk to you in a way that I'd feel slightly uncomfortable doing if it was in private, because I'd feel like I'm taking your valuable time. And so it's just a conversation between two people getting to know each other. And so I know a little bit about you, but I would like you to present yourself to me and the listeners. You're in a very special part of the investment world, as you'll discover is kind of close to my heart. But tell us about your investing journey, I guess.
Sure. No, it's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation. It's been, it's just the second day. It's felt like we're at like mile 12 of the marathon. But it was, what a special morning. About 12 of us skied all morning, and every chairlift was another investment portfolio manager, fund manager, family office manager, talking about very interesting topics. So it's been like, that's in the morning, and then in the afternoon it's been like drinking out of a fire hose, so until midnight. So it's been great. So thank you for this invite. For me, what's interesting is my investment journey started a long time ago. I think what's really important, didn't plan on going here, but I think it's so important. I had an opportunity to sit at dinner with Tom Gaynor with a small group, and he talked about how he was exposed to investing because of his parents and grandparents. And I think my investment journey started because fortunately I had a few shares of a public stock, bank stock, when I went through high school and college. So I always thought about that when I went through every class. How did it relate to? And I think it's so important that we encourage our kids or grandkids to be exposed to it. Don't give them a Christmas gift that's depreciating, give them some shares of some stock. But 22 years ago, a mentor, my first mentor I ever had, I shared with him that I wanted to focus on the food and ag industry and start an investment fund. And he said, you need to go to Omaha to see Warren Buffett and copy him. So I've been going to Berkshire for 22 years. And out of those 22 years, we finally met last year. So it was a great opportunity to spend some time with you last year, but not nearly as good as this year. So that's how my investment journey started. And so for 22 years, I've been watching Warren and Charlie, thinking about how to apply it to my circle of competence, which is the food and ag industry, and how to build my mental models, my checklist, investment checklist, reflecting on what worked in my industry sector, but also their lessons that they teach.
And we're going to get onto the quadrifecta.
Yeah,
did I get that right?
I say quadfecta. I don't know exactly if it's in the dictionary.
And I can tell you that I can't wait to read the book that you brought up yesterday in your presentation at ValueX. Mm-hmm. But before we get there, what just like stood out to me is that you grew up on a dairy farm. Mm-hmm. And so some people want to go as far away as they can from their roots. And it seems like you, in a way, have stayed, while being a finance guy and an investing guy, very close to your roots. And I'm just curious to ask a question that William Green, and kind of like as a variation on the question that William Green asked, what is it about your experiences that you had when you were younger that brought you to this particular part of the investing world?
Yeah. I would say that, first, growing up on a dairy farm, it's very long-term oriented in investing. And so what I saw is the success, my family's business and other businesses I saw in that were people that thought like they were going to own it forever, because some of those families did, and they allocated capital in that way. And so just those characteristics I've taken from that upbringing. With that, I saw an industry that there was examples of great returns on capital and ones that were average or below. So I saw that there was definitely a future there. And so I went to Cornell University, focused on that. Afterwards, went to New York with Rabobank focused on agriculture and food companies and mergers and acquisitions. So for a decade. So, and there's, it's not as Reed Hastings would talk about. Some of the most important, one of the most important things also is to choose an industry where you don't. Who's your competition, and how do you differentiate relative to that competition? So what I saw was that you could really have a good journey as long as you could execute really well.
And so I'll lay my cards on the table in the agriculture front. I did not grow up on a farm, but my father grew up on a chicken farm in Israel with hens in cages, I guess, laying eggs. And I, as a young child, visiting my grandparents and cousins, would go and collect eggs. And as a result, I did an agribusiness class with Professor Goldberg, who I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, Ray Goldberg.
Yeah,
I have a picture. I just saw him 3 weeks ago.
Lovely
He's
guy.
97 years old.
Wow.
I've been seeing him at his event, at his conference for 27 years.
Well,
Okay.
Ray, if you see this, I'm sorry I went to the dark side. I didn't stay in agriculture, but I'm talking to graduate students of yours, or friends of yours at least. Yeah. And but then my father was in agricultural chemicals, and so initially seeds and then agricultural chemicals, which I'm sure you know a lot about. But for me, from the outside, I see, and we know that Warren talks about farms a lot, but I see agriculture or the food system as being a particularly difficult area to invest, because I kind of like the branded goods companies that come at the very end and they take the stuff that the farmers produce for pittance and turn it into a branded product. And the poor farmers are subject to the vicissitudes of all sorts of things they cannot control, starting with weather and all sorts of other things. And so where I got to was I wanted to be in branded goods and as close to the consumer as possible. But you've built a very successful fund and career investing in the stage prior to that. And I'm sure you've heard this question before, so help me out.
Sure. And you can poke at it a few other times. I don't actually get this question that often, so I'd say that it's a mature industry. So any mature industry that's also cyclical can eat people up and spit them out. And so there's a lot of people that don't come, if you're not extremely good at executing and a low cost margin type business where you don't have a lot of barriers to entry, you won't be successful. So it's not for the faint of heart. So, but my examples are when I left Rabobank 22 years ago, came back to California, helped start a dairy feed milling company, 20 million in sales, and we grew that to 2 billion in sales in a mature market. Yeah. So the returns were better than Buffett or Berkshire, better than, more than 20 times, more than 30 times our initial capital investment. So if I look at that, it had, which will, part of my investment mental model is that if you think of, Walmart or Amazon with Jeff Bezos, like a fanatical founder, fanatical management team, or founder's mentality as Bain Consulting, or you could see it as Good to Great, the book. And I remember our management team 20 years ago, we're having book club discussions or book meetings to talk about hedgehog theory and things like that. But if you've got a culture like that in a mature industry, you can really grab market share and create a real flywheel effect. And today that business, it grew from 20 million to 2 billion and 20 employees to 650 employees. I
mean, 30 times your money is good in any industry. And what comes up for me as you say that is that actually ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, has just been in the news. And just to throw out a couple of names, I'm certain, and I understand so little, I think there's a European company called Bunge that also is a trader of grains and other. And then having lived in Switzerland now for a while, I've discovered that Switzerland, in at least 2 agricultural or food commodities, coffee and, why am I blanking on the other one? Coffee and chocolate. So you have these companies that are kind of like globally dominant traders. And I think of you with a feed milling business in California, and then you're faced with those traders who are full of sort of ultra sharp Wall Street types. I'm really curious if you could give me and the listener keys to how to understand those big trading companies and how people win
Right.
against them.
Well, yeah, and they were suppliers to our business in California. So, but we were also competing because they would also bring in commodities and sell. Uh, what we did is looked at the McKinsey, I believe it's McKinsey model, where you have that triangle of customer intimacy, or operational excellence, or product innovation. And we focused on customer intimacy and share of wallet. So we just knew our customers, and we were fanatical, and we were local. So we could excel at winning that customer and that wallet share versus an ADM or a Cargill or the other local competitors through that relationship model. And you can apply that to banking as an example. Operational excellence, Visa, customer intimacy would probably be Goldman Sachs or Wells Fargo.
Yeah, or just the broker that you deal with who develops his own franchise. And what was the end of the milling business? Is it still independent?
It got sold to a large pension-backed group.
So
recently.
still financial investor, effectively.
Yeah, and it's doing well now, and it's done well for them here in the last couple of years.
I like to think, so, I've done forays into mining of various different kinds. And what I've learned is that miners are, well, this is going to be unfair to many miners, but it's kind of like more of I like to call it a mafia, in which there is a relatively small number of highly capitalized, very smart people who are capable of taking advantage of downturns and what did you call getting the bunch of junior miners and people who thought they knew what they were doing but didn't, who get spat out.
Right.
And I feel like in a way that if one were to take the same view of for me the branded food companies are kind of like a mafia. And sort of like suppliers like Syngenta or ADM or Bunge are also mafia, but is that the right way to look at it? Or
let's just take ADM or Bunge, and I'll kind of go up a level. Let's look at the history of ADM, which might be a company, it's been a company that I've owned Bunge and ADM off and on over the last 20 years. But if I take a level up, I would say what's most important is back to the chairman and the board and the CEO. And if I look at ADM's journey, I was more impressed with ADM when it had a founder family that was highly invested in building, and they were an insurgency type culture, and they just disrupted regions and countries when they went in and built, for example, their business in Australia and different parts of the US. So that culture was there to build ADM. The culture that exists today is, I don't think that there's significant ownership by the chairman or the board and the CEO. They're more of a compliance, more of an ESG oriented. Capital allocation, I think, is poor.
yeah.
They remind me more of a bank on the West Coast that didn't do so well when they didn't have a board that really understood their business.
Yeah.
They are buying businesses at 13 times EBITDA, or at least 12, in trying to morph. And so I look at capital allocation and how they're using their free cash flow and what they're allocating to. Where if I freeze that one, I look at Bunge, and they, a few years ago, got a CEO that has that type of fanatical founder mentality. And I think he bought $6 or $20 million of the stock himself personally. The stock has maybe doubled since he started 3 years ago.
Right.
And they're doing some very impressive and disciplined capital allocation decisions. So I don't know about the mining industry, but I look at my industry, those two companies, and I would expect a better outcome over the next 10 years from Bunge than ADM. And I would start from ownership. I would want to see massive ownership by the CEO and the board.
I think that you presented yesterday on this idea, and you brought up an image of the book, and maybe you'll mention it in a second, but I'm really only connecting now to the power, and you clearly have discernment in identifying fanatics. And so, and I can totally see, and I probably could dredge up at one or two examples myself of, where it was the fanatic that made all the difference. Actually, somebody we have in common is clearly Warren falls into that fanatic category, right, as does the story of the owner of Nebraska Furniture, Rose Blumkin.
Yeah, right.
But how can you sort of how do you know when you found one?
Yeah.
Have you gotten better at it? Maybe you want to name some?
Yeah, at 55 years old, I feel like I'm just now starting. I just feel like I really have refined the model to see it better, because 10 years ago I didn't have that. And so 10 years ago, 10, 11 years, 12 years ago, I looked at, I'll give you a couple examples, a produce business in the United States. Had $1 billion in sales. Founder had started it. His family had sold the business. He restarted in the business. And I looked at that business, and he wanted to buy out some shareholders that helped him get started. And I put an 8 times multiple because I'm a value investor on that business. And if I would have put a 10 or a 12 on it, I would have probably had $100 million invested in his company. And today he has $7 billion in sales.
Right. And it started where, remind me?
$1 billion.
Right. So 7x in sales.
Yeah, in 10 years.
And at least 7x in profits.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's over 300 million of income, I think,
right,
today. So I looked at that, and that's where I responded yesterday to one of the presenters in the 5 minutes each. We had the one presenter presented a company, a food distribution company, and he said he put on his black hat, what's holding him back, and one was price to book value. And for me, it was like a lightning bolt. Is like, I made that mistake 10 years ago. Right. Is that if you have someone like Blumkin at Nebraska Furniture Mart, or Tom Gaynor at Markel, and people that are just love what they do, yeah, and they give the employees the employees and the team likes working with them, yeah, and they feel like a mission and a purpose that's not just a paycheck. Just magnify that over the number of employees, and it might be 90,000 employees. But if the leader, is Warren Buffett, and what we would say at the feed milling company is, never drive a car nicer than your customers. Right. Never drive a car that's nicer than the salespeople. Yeah. So as a result, the CEO of the company got the hand-me-down pickup truck from the salesman. Right. So and it just creates a culture. So when you see that kind of founder-led, or it might not be founder-led, it could be like Bungie, where the person is just driven and engaged and loves the business, and that's contagious.
I think that what I find myself struggling with as you tell me this, and I'm sort of I'm feeling quite inspired actually, is the fanatics that we've brought up, and are very different personalities. So the way Warren manifests his fanaticism, he would call himself lethargic. He described himself as lethargy and sloth. Yeah. Whereas we know that Rose Blumkin would be in the store 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and that's the only place she wanted to be. And even when she was hauled up in front of a judge, she ended up setting the judge some carpet, which is just awesome. So that's a different kind of fanatic. And over and above that, whenever something's a virtue, we get a whole bunch of people advertising that they are that thing when actually that they're not. And so I'm sure there are plenty of annual reports that talk about the management being fanatics and they're not. So I'm curious if you can help me, I'm doing this very selfishly, to sort of kind of discern what rules of thumb, what indications, clues that you're onto a fanatic or not.
So it's because this is, I'll share it, and it's interesting because 15 years ago or 13 years ago, I would have been more oriented to the numbers, CFA, charter holder, what's the numbers, the metrics, like I've shared. And what I'm talking about now is I ask so I've shared this along the way, and a few people have helped me refine it. And so what I would picture is, so what I ask myself, and I say to my team of 11 of us that are out looking and meeting with companies, is ask yourself, if you were 25 years old, would you want to go work for this CEO, owner, chairman? And ask it on the chairman and ask it on the CEO. But would you want to put your entire career
into that?
Would you want that person to be your mentor? If you had an only daughter, would you want her to marry into
that family? So it's a great question, and I know that there's been rare occasions when I've kind of said to myself, I've actually had this kind of conversation with the CEO a couple of times, maybe more than a couple of times, where I've said, this is so incredible. I think that I'd give up everything I'm doing at Aquamarine Fund just to come and work with you because this is so much fun.
Yeah.
One was with the chairman, the CEO of a credit rating agency called Duff & Phelps, and they were opening up offices all over the world. And I was just like, wow. Yeah. And at the same time, I feel like I can get taken in by beguiling salespeople.
Yeah.
And so I don't always trust I often don't trust my own personal reaction and judgment. In fact, I want to mistrust it because I've gotten it wrong. I've gotten it right as well, but I still don't really trust my judgment. But it's a great question to ask. Do you have other questions like that have come up for you?
Yeah, those are the main ones. I would say back on the catching myself, because you find that what I'm also describing is somebody who could be high charisma. They could be extroverted.
And narcissistic.
Right. So they might be highly extroverted, highly charismatic, and they're just intoxicating, right? So I look for, if I've got that, where is the counterbalance in their team that anchors them? Like, you don't have that with Warren Buffett or Tom Gaynor or some of the other people we might think about, right? They're not, I think some of those people are more introverted.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about that. But if you find an extroverted, high charisma person, and so even Warren Buffett had Charlie Munger, the abdominal no man. So we'll see it in the balance sheet, is that if we have a company that's highly charismatic and highly aggressive person that's fanatical, and the balance sheet is highly leveraged,
there's no counterweight.
There's no counterweight.
Yeah.
And so we've got some great partnerships in companies that have very extroverted, charismatic people, and there is people in the company that are counterweight, or they have the emotional intelligence to be to not put their balance sheet in jeopardy.
Yeah, and I would say that, I mean, I know for myself, I don't know how I'd identify it in others. So Michael Eisner, the former chairman of Disney, wrote a wonderful book on business partnerships in which he talks about his partnership with a key person at Disney, whose name escapes me, and he talks about Warren and Charlie and a few others. There's this kind of counterintuitive idea for me that if the person, the charismatic personality who might over-leverage the company, is aware, self-aware, emotional intelligence, you called it, and actively seeks somebody to counterbalance them or to fill in the gaps. And I don't know if you've noticed here at ValueX, Chantal fills in so many gaps for me, and my whole team fills in so many gaps for me. But the only reason why I think they're there to fill in the gaps is because I'm pretty open about my flaws and consciously seek help. And it's an interesting idea because I'm not sure that I could identify that in a manager. And it seems like you're quite confident. And what's interesting is you look for the fanatic, and then you say, wait a second, now let's compare him to the balance sheet and see what's unfolding in the balance sheet, actually. Right. And it was just a fantastic learning opportunity there, you know?
Yeah, and Yeah, and I'm still developing, right? I mean, if we can live to 99 years old, we're a little bit more than halfway right now.
Yeah, and so,
So,
and so the idea you presented yesterday was a poultry producer, a Brazilian poultry producer. I know of at least one Mexican poultry producer, and for your and the listeners' interest, very early on in my career, as I was working as an analyst at a consulting firm, and we were doing a European-wide study of poultry producers, actually. And so it was poultry, the whole poultry industry. So I told you yesterday I visited this company, Lohmann, who are a worldwide producer of eggs. And I visited quite a few slaughterhouses. It was hard for me, as it would be for anyone, because you realize that the bird is actually just a part of the production process, which is sort of scary, actually. But so why the Brazilian company?
yeah. I thought you were going to go down a different path there.
Which path did you think I was going to go down?
I'm happy not to go down. I'm long protein. I think there'll be more protein consumed in the world. It could be plant-based protein, or it could be meat protein.
I kind of had a brain freeze and went to the Brazilian poultry company. We can leave that alone. I'm actually curious, unless you really want to do the poultry company.
I think we can do.
But tell me about how one does go long protein with 7 billion people on the world.
Yeah, and eventually 9 and 50% more calories needed in the future.
Say that again?
There'll be 2 billion more people by 2050.
Right.
And there'll be 50% more calories needed.
Consumed on an end user basis, and we know
in the world than there is today.
And if we create food through protein, at least cow and chicken-based protein, the input there is kind of enormous.
But there's a lot of I don't want to go down what's the carbon footprint of one versus the other, because also it's what so we get to, and it's great, we engage with some different university professors to really think about where is the puck going to go in nutrition. And we have, and even I have had a diet of being a strict vegan for a period of time just to see what it was like and then have all my blood chemistry and then have a different diet just to think about trends. And what we see is that you have to get on nutrition, you have to get down to the cellular level, like what is the nutritional value of pea protein or almond protein. And I happen to be invested in different companies in those sectors, so I'm hoping they do very well. But what is the digestibility of that protein? And is it a full amino acid? So as a result, we see growth in those sectors, but we also see growth in the traditional sectors of poultry and beef and dairy, because there is a lot of nutritional work that's coming out that's saying that on a mitochondria level, what is needed and how much of the nutrition is getting to that. And so there's a lot of high protein diets in the United States. And so the consumption of all these meats are going up, and then you have all the emerging markets. So I see a significantly larger production of poultry and dairy and beef 10, 20 years out from now than there is today. And there still will be the alternatives. So back to your question about, it might be the company I shared yesterday that is a personal investment. It's not part of my investment fund because we don't invest in Brazil. We're focused on the U.S. In our fund. I think it's more interesting to take you back to 15 years ago and my lessons over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
As it relates to poultry.
Sure.
Because there was a company called Sanderson Farms.
Yeah.
And I remember being on the conference calls over the years with Joe Sanderson and meeting him in person over a long period versus Pilgrim's Pride versus Tyson Foods, and watching over that decade of a fanatical CEO, Bo Pilgrim, that was probably didn't have the abominable no man of a Charlie Munger in his company. And he went out and made an acquisition of a company that I personally also had shares of called Goldkist. He leveraged up his balance sheet.
Fruit.
Goldkist was a cooperative poultry company that became a public company.
Yeah.
And so Pilgrim's Pride leveraged up and bought those assets. Joe Sanderson owned a substantial, he might have been like a third of the ownership of the company. But he wasn't fanatical in a Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk type of fanatical way. He was fanatical more like an Warren Buffett, just very disciplined, very committed to his company. He would talk about on his earnings calls how people would say, why don't you build another whole complex in another region of the United States? He says, because my leverage is 2 times or 3 times. I'm not going to build until she tells me to. And he said, and the analyst was like, she. It's the company. It's my balance sheet. She needs to tell me that she has no debt, and then I'll build again. And so the question was, why didn't you buy those Pilgrims, the Goldkist assets?
Yeah.
And he said, I want to build. Effectively, he says, I want to be like the Southwest Airlines. I want my plants to be highly efficient, all the same equipment, the same everything. I don't want to buy somebody else's problems.
Yeah.
So fast forward, Pilgrims went bankrupt. And Joe Sanderson was $35 a share, and I think he went down to like 10 or 15 during the crash. And eventually Cargill bought him for like 350. So
did you write it all the way up?
Oh, of course I learned the lesson, never sell.
Right. At what point in that?
Oh, in the journey did I get out? I don't know exactly. But the lesson learned is just set it and forget about it, right?
Yeah.
Just set it and forget about it. But you got to set it with the Joe Sanderson, not the Bo Pilgrim that I think well of him, but he just probably didn't have the right board, the right counterbalance to challenge his thinking.
Yeah.
So if we're going into an investment, I think of a public company we invested in. We do a lot of 16 companies in the last 12 years that we've invested in. One's public and the other 15 are private. And our mindset, even in the public company, we're 11 years into it.
Yeah.
We haven't sold 1 share. So set it, but make sure you've got the right CEO, the right chairman, right board, right capital allocation, because the margins are so thin, you can't be sloppy.
I've had all 4 quadrants. So, the company that I should have said and forget it, and I sold half or all.
Yeah.
The company that I said and forget. I mean, I've had a number of situations where I've had a 6 or a 7x.
Yeah.
And then it's fallen back to a 2x, and I realize I have to sell.
Yeah.
Because something's unfolded. Not necessarily the CEO, but conditions in the industry change. So, I think that.
Well, and I think that's fair in my industry. Is I'm not in the food and ag industry. There are cycles, and there are periods of high growth, and then there's periods of where maybe you've now met the maximum potential, and it's now going to go from a 15% compounder to an 8.
Yeah, and there's maybe consolidation taking place.
Right. So on that, I do think that I admire some of the other industries that people presented on yesterday and today, where you're in industries that you might have 100-bagger. I don't expect. That's where you can just be in a Netflix or these explosive growth markets. Where I think for us, our target is 15%.
For every Netflix, there are so many non-Netflix companies, and I don't remember where we were talking about it, but we of course only remember the Netflix. We don't remember all the other ones, and so there's the people who did not survive are not around to tell their tale.
Right.
We think that the survival rate is far higher. So we need to be forgiving of ourselves, even though it's hard in the moment.
Yeah.
I want to go to 2 more places for fun as we close this. I'm envious of your 4 children. We have 3, so I want to ask you a little bit about your family and Davis. But before we go there, you've achieved what I think is, especially in the context of the conference we're at, enormous amount of success. I mean, your assets, last time I looked at a bio online, was 600 million. It's now 1.1 billion. I don't remember the internal rate of return, but I think it's very, very good. And what are your, you're still pretty young, younger than I am.
Yeah.
What are your plans? What are your ambitions and goals? And I think that part of why I'm asking the question just for fun is that I think that extraordinary things happen when we set our intent and express our goals in public.
Yeah.
So magic can happen.
Sure.
So I'm curious to know what the future might hold for you.
Yeah. So I actually had that question from one of my largest investors recently, and then my partner, and I had the discussion with my wife, and we took a walk, and she said, "You love what you do. Why?" I said, "I think I want to keep doing this forever." And she goes, "Yeah, that makes sense. This is what you love to do." So my goal is to be doing this 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And it's been, I've learned so much. I'm so much better today than where I was 10 years ago.
Yeah. In fact, you're blown away that 10 years ago anybody entrusted you with any money.
Well, also what I'm so appreciative of is when we adopted, and then 14 months later had triplets.
Wow.
And I look at that period, now they're 15 and 16, and I'm so grateful that I have such great partners that believed in the team and believed in me and placed capital with us, when we also had a lot of demands personally to maintain the balance of life with 4 kids in diapers.
And adopted, first one adopted, and 3.
Yes.
3. So.
Well, and that was a Buffett, since we share Berkshire in common. So we adopted, and so that was like December, January of one year, about 16 years ago. So the fertility doctor asked around that time, and I just got back from Omaha, "Do you want to try again?" And I said to the nurse, I just got back from Omaha, and I was listening to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And they said, if you follow the compensation plan, you can predict the outcome and somebody's behavior. And I follow the compensation plan, and I've paid the doctor 100% 4 times for in vitro, and we haven't had any success. So I realized we didn't have a compensation plan that aligned our interests.
Right.
And so the nurse says, "You want me to tell the doctor that the root cause of the problem is the compensation plan?" And I said, "Yes."
And just to interject for a minute to hear the outcome, I feel like this conversation is going between you and the nurse far better because you've adopted a child, so in a way the pressure's off.
Yes, I was writing it off. Yeah. I thought this was the last call I was going to have with the doctor's office. Yeah. And I did say to the nurse that our family's complete, and so I can now tell you what's on my mind and my chest. And so the nurse says, "Anything else?" I said, "Yeah, also tell the doctor I think he's bored, because there's no gamification to his career. That if I play golf, if I put $1 on every hole, I am so much more engaged and so much more fun than if it's just a game of golf." So there's no gamification, and so I think he's bored. So I said to her to tell him that I think he's bored. So I really.
And so it got gamified.
So a week later, she calls me back, and she says, "I've talked to the doctor, and the doctor agrees with you. The next one's free."
Unless we get success. In which case you pay double.
So I said to my wife, "It's free. Let's try one more time." And then so we had triplets. The triplets, and I thought, there's that saying of he who laughs last laughs the longest.
Yeah.
And I said, that doctor got the last laugh.
Yeah.
And so I share that because I also bring it back around to business. Is where's the alignment for the chairman and the board to gamify their job of being board members and chair? Mm-hmm. If they don't have substantial ownership, mm-hmm. if they don't have a dollar bet on every hole, so I just don't think that the outcomes are going to be as good.
Yeah.
So I think of the ADM story. I think ADM was better when there was substantial ownership than it is today. They were more of an insurgency culture.
Yeah.
So I bring it back around to what I want to see in companies is I want to see a board that has gamification and they're committed and they're in. And so in private companies, we can be a little more structured as we can say, instead of a regular board fee, let's have a board fee that's half that and set up a 10-year options program
Right.
for a bonus based on an outcome where if it's a win for shareholders, it's a win for the board member.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I remember taking a class with, he was a famous professor of finance at the time where it all came down to incentives, period.
Yeah.
But I had the experience of talking to, my wife and I had maybe 1 or 2 children at the time. And I made the mistake of talking to a childless couple, giving them, and it seems like it's a quite common story that there's, you know, the couple will adopt and then they get children of their biological children.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that that's not something you talk about.
Well,
But
yeah.
and we stopped at 3, and I always thought that we would have 2, and then when we went to 3, I said, well, once we've gone to 3, we might as well go to 4. But we ended up stopping at 3, and so I'm kind of envious because once you get to 4, you're a tribe.
Yeah, we're definitely a tribe, and we took them all to Omaha last year.
Wow.
And it was very rewarding. Is of the triplets, one of the triplets said at halftime we were at lunch, and I said, we'll watch it, you know, on this media thing. We have a group of about 100 of us, and we'll watch it on the big screen instead of going back to the stadium. And she goes, no, I really want to go back there and sit there and listen. She's like, Dad, I just love his voice. And I realized Warren Buffett told us like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, he wanted to help teach kids. And so he created the Secret Millionaires Club cartoon series.
Right.
Well, when our kids were young and in the minivan, of course the minivan, we would put the DVD in and our kids watched Secret Millionaires Club with Warren Buffett's voice thousands of times.
Oh, wow.
So I said, do you realize you've listened to his voice thousands of times? You've got 1,000 hours listening to Warren Buffett. And she goes, no, that's it. And her eyes lit up. So they're all going back again this year.
Amazing. Maybe I'll get to meet them. And I'm envious. I didn't think of having our children listen to the Secret Millionaires Club.
Yeah.
Last thought and question.
Yeah.
If somebody hears this and something you've said has gelled with them and they want to find their way to you, what's the best way to find their way to you?
That would be probably LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is good.
Yeah, LinkedIn would be a good spot.
And I just wanted you to mention at least any other books you want to mention is also very welcome, but I want to make sure we get it right because this sort of having a fanatic at the helm is, there's a book that you put up yesterday at the conference and everybody was scribbling it down and I can't.
I think it's, so that's a good one and it really captures a lot of the essence of it. It's Founder's Mentality.
Right.
By a couple people at Bain Consulting. And I think you can capture it if you go search YouTube and type in Founder's Mentality, Bain Consulting, and you know there's about a 15-minute video about insurgency culture.
Oh, wow.
And I think, and there's a whole series of them. If you find it, there's like 15 little pieces, and you can capture it. And I think that would be a way to reflect on our value investing model and enhance it to capture that. But then we've got to make sure we've got the abdominal no man, that's the counterbalance. So that would be Edwin de Bono, and there's books on him, and it's called The 6 Thinking Hats.
Yes.
And if you think of the abdominal no man, it's having a process of parallel thinking and having somebody that says, what's the black hat? And you do it so well here in the meeting where you say, like, after my presentation, is there anybody here in the audience that can help you?
Yeah.
Is there, and let's go to the negative. What are some concerns here?
Yeah.
And so the 6 thinking hats really, if you can set that up for a board structure and have a board trained or the senior leadership of a management team trained on it, what's helpful is that you then have given permission for everybody to be negative and to say what the negatives are and that's the black hats, the 6 thinking hats.
Yeah.
And then you can go to, and you can write down very quickly, because the introverts never get the microphone. The introverts have some of the best things to say. So if everybody's forced to say stuff, and everybody's forced to be negative,
yes,
then you can put on the green hat, which is what is the solution to those negatives.
yes,
How do you mitigate the risk? And so that's a really good book / or just watch the videos.
Yes.
But then try to look for that in the companies we all invest in.
yes,
So it's the balance to having the fanatical CEO that needs to know where his blind spots are, and have a board have permission to challenge and to problem solve and think about the scenarios.
I think that's that making sure everybody in the room speaks is one of the parliamentary rules. I think that there's a really lovely essay there by you that I would love to see, if you, or investor letter if you haven't yet written it, because you've put it together really beautifully between those two things. Ejnar, it's a pleasure to have you. Yeah. He's on LinkedIn if you want to find him.
Great.
Thank you so much for making it out to Switzerland.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
It's been a blast, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot from you. Thank you.